Hey everybody, and welcome back. So in this video, what we're going to talk about is I like to kind of joke about lead sleds, and it's when people build RC airplanes really heavy and then what kind of complications that creates. And this applies actually to just the way we fly RC airplanes, but when you build a really high wing load airplane, it just creates all kinds of problems. So what I want to start off with is by jumping into looking at this P40 for a minute. So let's just say we built a P40 and it's at a reasonable wing load, okay? And then when we start to pitch the nose up, we start to slow down, right? I mean, that's pretty much what happens on an airplane. Anytime you pull back on that stick, the airplane's going to slow down a little bit, okay? What do we normally do? We add power, okay? Because as the angle of attack rises on the aircraft, it's wanting to try to climb. And on a heavy airplane, or actually on any airplane, if you don't do that, you're going to stall. Now on a heavy airplane, the stall will happen much sooner because the wings can only lift a given weight. But you get the gear down, you get the flaps down, you got a heavy airplane, high angle of attack, and it can get very, very dangerous, where you can tip stall the airplane, spin the airplane, all kinds of things can just go wrong. But I want you to remember as we talk about this, that anytime you're pulling back on that stick, you really should be adding power, right? I want you to remember that as we do this. But before we get too deep, I want to talk about my sponsor, RTL Fasteners. If you go to rtlfasteners.com, and you purchase more than $50 worth of their really neat kits and stuff, their hardware, you will get 30% off if you use DA30 in the code, okay? So it's a really neat relationship I've got with them. If you want to get 30% off, spend $50 or more. It's really great hardware. I mean, it's just, as I've said in other videos, I've used a lot of it on my giant scale airplanes. So now let's talk about flying a lead sled. So if you think about where the pilot workload is during flight, okay, taxiing doesn't take much. Taking off takes a little bit of skill. And then you think about landing. Most of your experience in flying is tested when you're landing an airplane. Now, if you fly the same airplane 100 times or 1,000 times, you will get to know the characteristics of that airplane. But let's say that you decided to scratch build your first airplane and it came out heavy. And you're sitting here, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to have somebody test fly it for me. I'm going to have them get in the air and fly it. So let's think about it like this. Let's say they're really, really good. But still, when you come to landing, it's going to get really, that safety factor gets really narrow there, because even the best pilot in the world on a new airframe is going to have some unknowns they've got to get used to, especially if your airplane is heavy, okay? But let's talk about you for a minute. Your capabilities might not even be capable of landing a heavy airplane because you just don't have the experience of flying a lot of complex aircraft yet, okay? So, and there's also some visual cues here that I want you to think about. So let's look at this little rendering I created. We got a P40 in the downwind, and I'm going to talk a lot more about the pattern in a minute. But you're cruising into the downwind. When you turn downwind to base, you can actually visually see the airplane. Here, let me get a little bit closer on this. So you can visually see the airplane moving from the right to the left a lot better. Okay? So you can kind of see how fast your airplane's going. But when you start to turn base to final, okay, that's where it's starting to come toward you. Let's zoom in on that a little bit. This is what your airplane's going to look like. Now, there's something going on here that I really want you to think about. You've got a lot of up elevator to hold it through the turn. You got your flaps down. You got your gear down. But what's really dangerous right now is you can't really tell your speed because it's coming toward you. And when you don't understand a high wing load airplane, this airplane could be very close to crashing. And I've seen more people lose an airplane turning base to final because as they're pulling back on that elevator, they're not adding power to pull the airplane through the turn. It is so critical anytime you're pulling back on that elevator, Are you adding power? I've got my muscle memory when I hold a radio that anytime I'm pulling back on the stick, I'm normally adding some power. So you've got to really realize that this right here is the most critical part. But I also want to tell you something that's different between a propellered airplane and like an EDF. An EDF, when you're turning base to final, the fan isn't grabbing as much air, so it takes a little bit longer. If you notice how long a ground roll is on an EDF taking off, because it's got to get up to speed, it's a lot longer than the propeller, because the propellered airplane is grabbing a lot more air. So when that EDF is turning base to final, if you're getting slow, you might need to be getting into 60, 70, 80, maybe even 100% power to get it through that turn if you've gotten it low and slow. Now what I want to talk about is your wing loading. So when you think of typical, and I use cube wing loading for my airplanes, and I want you all just to consider it for a minute. And I've got some stuff that's going to talk about this. So when you think of a slow flyer, your wing loading is under a 4. When you think of a trainer or a park flyer, your wing loading is in between 5 and 7. When you think about a sport or a scale aerobatic airplane, you're 7 to 10. And when you think about when you're thinking about a general sport or scale aerobatics, you're talking 7 to 10. And then when you're talking about sport or scale models, which would be like a Bonanza or a Cherokee or a Cessna, you're at 10 to 13. But warbirds can be 13 or over. Okay? So let's kind of break that down for the size of your airplane. If you have a 1,000 square inch wing at 250 ounces, you have a wing loading of 36 ounces. That cube wing loading is 13.7. So that is in your warbird to racer. But let's double that. Take 2,000 square inches, double your weight, you have the same wing loading in ounces, 36 ounces. But look at the cube wing loading, it's come down to 9.7. Then when you think about 4,000 square inches at 1,000 ounces, which is over 61 pounds, then you've got a 36 ounce wing load, but your cube wing loading is down to 6.8. You are now in a trainer to park flyer for a big ass airplane, okay? So I just want you to think about that. So now let's talk about the pattern for a minute. Most of the time for me, in both full scale and model aircraft, when you're in the downwind and you're basically right beside the numbers, at least for me, I've got the airplane configured to land. I've got it slowed down. I may have a notch of flaps in. If it's a model aircraft, I've got the landing gear down and the flaps down. I get the plane configured because I don't want to be reconfiguring it as I'm making my base, my downwind to base and my base to final turn. Okay, I want the airplane all trimmed up and ready to land. So then when I turn base, I visually can see the speed of the airplane pretty well because it's moving from the right to the left. Now this is a left-hand pattern. But like I said before, when I'm starting to turn base to final, it's really hard to judge the speed. But there's something going on I want you to think about for a minute. When you're in the downwind, you're descending. You've got your nose down and you've got your power back a lot. When you are turning downwind to base, you're still descending. You might still have your power back some. And because it's moving from your right to the left, you can definitely see the speed. But then when you're starting to turn base to final, you're actually starting to stop your descent because you're wanting to get set up on final. And you want that to be a gentle descent so you just don't pile drive the airplane into the runway. But there's things going on right here that you have to keep in the back of your mind. You are flattening out your descent, which means you're pulling up on your stick. You're already in a turn, which means you're pulling up on your stick. And if you're not adding power, and it's a heavy airplane, it's going to fall out of the sky. Even a typical wing load airplane could crash right then. But with all the warbirds I've seen built over my lifetime, most of them come in about 20% heavy. And I've got a video I'm working on right now. It won't be done for another week, and it's about building light. Okay, because I have spent most of my model aircraft life learning how to build light, okay? So let's think about an EDF the same way that we talked about earlier. You're in your downwind. You should be configured right here. Gear down, flaps down. You got everything ready to go. You can tell how fast you're going because you can visually see. Right here is when things get dangerous. But what happens sometimes is you overshoot. And then you really start to yank back on the stick to get back on the center line of the airplane. And this is the death of an airplane if you're not getting onto the power really quick. Because when you start to really pull it tight through that turn, your angle of attack is going up, you got the stick way back, and if you don't have your power forward, you're going to be in trouble. Now, what I want to do is just take this illustration real quick and think about the configuration of this airplane right here. Okay? Up elevator, left rudder, a little bit of left aileron. What happens when this airplane stalls? Well, if you think about how you go into a spin, you've got rudder in and you've got the elevator back. So if you're doing this base to final and you're not adding in the power, you are really going to get in trouble. Now look, if you're flying an ARF, chances are the wing loading and everything on that's already figured out. But you can still stall going base to final if you don't stay on the power. But if you're scratch building or building your own airplane and you've got a higher wing load, you could get into trouble. And this right here tells it all for me. The reason I build big is because the planes just fly so much easier. My MSL2 originally started out at 58 pounds and 9 ounces, but I've added the wheel pants and some skirts and the 2-row radio and added a little bit more battery. So it weighs 61 pounds right now. But it has a 33-ounce wing load because it's got 4,232 square inches of wing. Look at my cubed wing loading, 6.1. It is right in the middle of a trainer or a park flyer, and it flies like that, okay? I mean, my airplane absolutely flies like that. So what I want everybody to think about when you fly a lead sled, okay, and that's what I'm calling it, a lead sled, and I've flown a lot of them. I want you just to consider this. I used to test fly all kinds of people's planes. And I try not to do it anymore just in case they've built something that I didn't catch that was wrong and I crashed the plane. It's happened to me once and it really bothered me because I very rarely crash an airplane. And the airplane I crashed just had some problems with the way the servos were linked up, that basically they had push-pull rods, but in a high-speed, basically dive pulling out, there was no elevator left. The rods were bending and just flexing really bad. And I crashed the airplane. And it really bothered me. But once we took the airplane apart, I mean, even the builder knew, oh gosh, I shouldn't have built an 80-inch airplane with those push-pull things, whatever they're called, those control rods. I don't even use anything like that. I use direct servo linkage. But when you think of when you think about flying a heavy airplane, even taking off is a little bit different. You got to have airspeed, or you get it in the air and you see some people just instantly basically snap roll it. The plane just wasn't flying good enough. Okay, it stalled. But when you're landing a heavy airplane, and look, I'm trying to help people that are getting into scratch building, not the experts, because there's a lot of people that are great builders and horrible flyers. I hope if you're scratch building, you are a great flyer, because I have seen the death of so many scale warbirds because people build them heavy. They have no concept of the angle of attack of that wing and what's happening when they're pulling back on the stick and not adding throttle. Okay? It's so important that you have muscle memory, that every time you're pulling back on that stick, you're adding a little bit of throttle. And if you don't need it, then your brain tells you, okay, come off that throttle. It needs to be almost muscle memory. I call it the teeter-totter. Anytime I'm pulling back on my elevator, I'm adding power. And it's really kept me flying many years without crashing a bunch of airplanes. But that's pretty much it, everybody. I just want everybody to realize that I've had a lot of people saying, oh, landing's easy, flying an RC airplane's easy. If you're flying the same airplane all the time, they're absolutely right. But if you're going from one airframe to another airframe, you really need to think about what you're doing in that flight. In your mind, you need to mentally lay out, how am I going to do this flight? And it's every flight if you're flying a really heavy wing-loaded airplane, because you can get so far behind the curve so quick, and as long as you got gas or battery left, just go around. Don't ever force an airplane to land. Unless the engine's died, there's no reason it has to land. If you've screwed up the approach, add the power, go around. If you are flying a ducted fan and see it start to wiggle like this, you're approaching a stall. If you're flying a regular fixed wing propeller driven airplane, the stalls can be very, very quick and very abrupt. And the best thing to do is just add full power and try to fly out of it and fly away from people. Okay? So I hope you find this video interesting. Please like and subscribe. I'm trying to build my YouTube, and I'm finding a lot of people saying, I didn't even know you did this. This is a really cool channel. So rock on, everybody. Have an awesome day and stay safe.